Well, Shane Dawson's series has ended, and I still don't know that I know what's inside the mind of Jake Paul. I mean, I think Shane did a really good job of getting us to understand a lot of things that we didn't understand before, and I'm glad that Shane showed us all these different dimensions to everything, but this last episode, I just kind of feel like, I don't know, I feel a little underwhelmed. But in a way that's kind of interesting too, because Jake Paul has been this like giant source of drama and controversy for so long, so for me to feel underwhelmed by everything, I don't know, that's weird, right? That's kind of interesting. So as I've been doing throughout this whole series and my reactions to Inside the Mind of Jake Paul, I'm just going to try to be as honest as I can, and this one for me, I don't know, like I'll get to it towards the end of this video. There was one moment that I think kind of made the whole episode for me, but I don't know, it didn't feel, I don't know, we'll talk about it. So this channel is primarily a mental health channel, and I like to talk about mental health, so I really do appreciate these kinds of things like Shane has been doing, and I love that we actually sat down with Jake, and it kind of felt a little bit like a therapy session, even though Shane is not a licensed therapist. It still had that vibe, and I like that, and I was excited going in for that, but I was a little underwhelmed, and I'm going to talk about that. Sorry, I keep saying underwhelmed. I know, it's the truth. I'm underwhelmed. Since I am going to be talking about mental health topics, I just want to say, especially to Jake, if Jake should be watching for any reason, I have no reason to ever believe that Jake Paul would watch one of my videos, but hi Jake, if you're out there watching, or anybody from the Paul family, or anybody who knows the situation intimately, I just want to say, you know, I don't want to apply any concepts that I'm saying directly to you, and I guess what I want to say is that I'm kind of like theorizing here and postulating, and I don't really know what's going on, and I hope I've made that clear throughout all of my reactions that I don't really know what's happening in these people's lives, including yours, Jake, if you're watching, and I'm not intending to try to diagnose or any of that. I just think it's interesting to look at things from my perspective, and if it lines up with your perspective, great, maybe there's something to learn. If it doesn't, then whatever, it is what it is. I just like facilitating the conversation. But what I do want to say to Jake Paul and the Paul family and everybody else is that I have no ill intentions. I don't intend to harm anybody with the things that I say. I'm not trying to hurt anybody. Mental health is a touchy topic and it's very personal, and I just want to make that clear. Should anybody be watching? I kind of don't think that's what's going to be happening, but I just feel better knowing that I put that out there as my intention. So one thing that I do want to mention, but I don't want to get too far into it because I've already talked about it so much, is that I saw during this whole conversation with Jake a lot of talk about enmeshment, although it was never really called enmeshment. This whole idea of people in the house, the Team 10 house, and people in the Jake Paul family, in the Paul family, excuse me, having unclear roles and acting in multiple capacities and never really having clear boundaries. I keep talking about this. I don't want to rehash it too much, but like it's so clear to me, like clear as day now, especially talking with Jake, like that happened a lot in the Team 10 house where people weren't sure of what was going on. There was a lot of confusion. So it's not surprising to me that there might have been some mental health issues or just like interpersonal relationship issues, which are related to mental health issues. And I've also mentioned in the past that I considered that maybe Jake has some caretaking behaviors, which might have stemmed from the divorce. I don't know. I'm not going to put words in Jake's mouth. It's just like a common thing that happens when children of divorce, they try to take care of the parents, or they try to take care of their siblings, or take care of the family, and like putting yourself in a caretaker role makes you feel like you're in control of things, like you have power over a situation where maybe you don't have power. So I could see a little bit of that in the conversation with Jake, where he was like concerned about like where was Alyssa gonna live, and like I'll give you a place to stay, and he took on the Martinez twins, and like, you know, there was a lot of talk that just reminded me of caretaking behavior. And let me just say here also that I'm not trying to bash on anybody else involved in the whole situation. So Alyssa, Martinez twins, Nick Crompton, like anybody else, my purpose here is not to create more drama. Okay, so I did write down notes, so I'm not super scatterbrained. And one of the things that I think was clear to me anyway, I believe it, you can make your own decisions, is that Jake does kind of understand that a lot of the stuff he did was shitty and a lot of the stuff he did was wrong, and he seems to have been able to put himself as an outsider looking in on the situation and see where he's made mistakes and where problems came up. And I think that's a good thing. You know, that's what I think all of us have been kind of wanting to see from Jake, some kind of ownership of what's been going on. But I'm a little concerned about that Jake doesn't see that he's exploiting children. Like, point blank, like, he's exploiting children with the whole merch thing. And there's a reason why laws exist around how you can advertise around children's programming. So, Jake, if you're watching, I see you not getting it. And I believe that you don't get it. And I believe that you feel kind of like attacked almost, or you feel like, why are people not trusting me here? Like, this is just who I am. This is what I've always been doing. But that's what's happening is you, Jake. Jake is not seeing. I feel weird talking directly to Jake. So Jake is not seeing he's being defensive, is what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say this nicely, but sometimes you can't say things nicely. I feel like there's a lot of defensiveness, and that's why you don't get it, because you're not seeing the other side. You can't have empathy for the other side because it feels like you're being attacked so much. This is something I try to talk about a lot on my channel. I just feel like it's hard to get people to see it, because when we're feeling emotions and we feel things are so personal, it's hard. It's hard to see that we're like in this tunnel vision, but we are. And when we're feeling defensive and when we're feeling attacked and we're feeling like, why are people not trusting me? Like, I know I'm a good person, so why? It's hard when we're defending ourselves to see how other people see us. And I feel like on this particular issue with the children and the exploitation, it feels so personal to you for whatever reason. I'm not going to judge the reason, but I think it feels so personal, and I think there's probably a very good reason why it feels so personal. You don't see the other side, so I don't know, if I were Jake, I would sit on that. I would think about it carefully, maybe with a therapist, somebody who can kind of pick it apart. Because I think because of the fact that he was defensive on this one issue, I think there's probably something deeper there that could be discovered with the right person. Okay, so moving on, something that I think that this series has done really, really well, that I wish more people would do in general when they talk about mental health, is it showed that people can have problems with their personality, that they can have personality traits that are a little shitty, that are a little off, that aren't quite right. Myself included, and you watching included, whoever you are. And you can have that and still not have like diagnosable mental illness, and like, it's okay. Like, personality traits are on a spectrum, and you don't have to be like the full throttle like personality problem to have a problem. And I've been trying to like give this message out there for the longest time, you know, in stuff that I've talked about with narcissism and other issues. So I'm glad to see like a series like this take personality a little more seriously. I know that people are going to like get angry at me for even thinking that, because of the whole way it started off as sociopathy. But I feel like that was kind of the point. The whole point was to go into it like as a caricature of what is a psychopath and what's going on here, and come out the other side and see like, no, there's a real person and there are problems. There are personality problems, because we all have them. But it's not as severe as it might look from first glance. So because I'm all into the personality traits and the maladaptive personality traits, as I was listening to the conversation between Shane and Jake, I just kept hearing words that are the personality traits, and I wrote down the list of the ones that I picked out, not always relating to Jake, sometimes relating to other people, and I think I just want to kind of go through them and talk about them quickly. So one that really stuck out to me was that Shane said that Jake seemed very detached from his emotions, and detachment is actually a whole personality domain. So it's a, you know, personality traits, you can describe them in a lot of different ways depending on which model you're using or whatever, but the model that I like to use, which you can find in the back of the DSM-5 if you're interested, they have 5 different personality trait domains, and detachment being one of them. The domain kind of like encompasses the traits. So detachment is kind of basically like not really being connected to emotions and people and stuff. But there's a specific trait which it wasn't named, but it's the same concept of being detached from your emotions, and that's restricted affectivity, which is really just a big way of saying that you don't like emote yourself. You don't show emotions all the way. You hold back, or whether deliberate or not, you know, whether you deliberately are forcing yourself to not feel the emotions, or there's something like psychologically blocking you and you can't really access them. That's restricted affectivity. And this whole time through the whole series, not just here, although I think here really showed it, this whole time I have felt like Jake is just not really being emotional. Like, the only time I really feel like I saw Jake have an emotion was when it was happiness and joy, which is great. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, everybody should feel happiness and joy and should express it. And I love that Jake is able to express that. And I think that kind of comes across in his videos too. You know, I'm not a watcher of Jake Paul videos, sorry Jake. But I think generally you get that like excitement and happiness feeling when he's doing a video. So maybe that's why he does it, because that's like the one emotion he really gets into. But I'm concerned that he's not getting the full feeling of being a human being, because he's not feeling all of these different emotions that he probably should feel. Now, he's mentioned getting angry a few times, which is okay. That's anger is an emotion. Like, I think people get afraid of anger. Like, we should definitely feel anger and we should express anger. But in this interview with Shane, I never really saw the anger, so I was kind of frustrated, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But I was like, Jake, like, get pissed off. Like, Jake, cry, like, do something, because the whole time he was just kind of like blank-faced, and I'm also going to get to that later. Okay, so the next thing was attention-seeking. Now, attention-seeking was just kind of talked about in the context of YouTubers in general, and I think there's a fair argument here to say that most YouTubers are attention-seeking. Attention-seeking, we have to be careful when we talk about attention-seeking, because people mess this up a lot. It's normal to want attention from people. It is so normal to want to be connected to other people and to feel important and to feel like we're acknowledged and validated. Like, that is so super normal. I know people hear attention seeking and they think narcissism, narcissist, and yes, that's very true. Like, that is like one of the core traits of narcissism. There's only 2 traits, and attention seeking is one of them. But attention seeking, when it's maladaptive, is when it becomes excessive, when it's like, I need you to be looking at me all the time. I need you to acknowledge me right now. It's more than just wanting to be loved, and that's part of it, but that's I'm trying to be careful about how I say normal and abnormal here, but to some extent we all do attention seeking, and on YouTube especially, attention seeking can like it can just blow up and get crazy because the business model is built on getting attention. So the business model, like it or not YouTube, because I know YouTube might fight me on this one, but the business model is to get people's attention. And so they're encouraging this maladaptive personality trait. Now, we could go back and forth about whether or not it's their responsibility, but it's happening. So I don't know. Is Jake Paul an attention seeker? I don't know. We've talked about risk-taking a little bit, which actually wasn't brought up here, but is another personality trait. I think he's a little bit of a risk-taker. I don't know if he's an attention seeker, but I just thought it was interesting that that personality trait came up in the conversation. Another trait that came up was manipulativeness, and this was basically brought up when Jake was saying that Alyssa was maybe being manipulative to get back at him for the way that she felt that he treated him, which he owned, you know, some of like he didn't treat her well. I don't really want to comment too much on the situation because I think it was just an ugly situation, and I don't really think anybody was at fault. I just feel like it just went bad really fast, and nobody really understood what was going on. it just feels like one of those ugly, ugly situations that I don't think it's appropriate for us to make judgments and decide who's to blame. But I do think it was manipulative for Alyssa to do that to Jake. And I think it's appropriate to call it manipulative, and I think she would probably own that too, judging by what we saw in the last episode. Also, though, I would say that the whole situation was manipulative. We heard about Jake, not being cool to her as his boss. Like, I don't want to assign blame here. It came up in reference to Alyssa and what she did hooking up with Jake's brother Logan, but at the same time, I feel like the house was probably full of manipulativeness. Another word that was used a few times was hostile, and hostility is one of these maladaptive personality traits, and Jake had mentioned being hostile a few times. I'm trying to remember. I know he said that when he found out that Alyssa had cheated on him, he just went off and got hostile. I think he described his tweet as happening because he was feeling hostile and angry. It doesn't surprise me that hostility would happen in a house where there's all this chaos and confusion and enmeshment and stuff. So again, I'm not judging anybody here. I'm not even saying that anybody has these personality traits. I'm just bringing up the words that were used for us to kind of consider why they might have happened in the Team 10 house and in this weird dynamic that was going on, and also to kind of reflect for ourselves. Do I have any of these traits? Do I do any of these things? Even though, Jake's situation is kind of extreme and not a normal situation for most people to go through, we still experience these traits in our normal and everyday lives. And if we can think to times when we've been hostile, when we've been manipulative, when we've been attention-seeking, when we've been detached or had a restricted affectivity, then maybe we can relate to Jake Paul a little bit more, and I know maybe some of us don't want to do that, but he's a human being, just like you. Something else that came up was impulsivity, and Jake had mentioned, the tweet. He did definitely say that the tweet was an impulsive thing, that he was just angry in the moment. And again, this kind of shows how some traits can kind of play off of each other, and some emotional situations that are very heavy can make these personality traits come out of us. The personality traits can situationally get what I would kind of almost call inflamed. They can rise up, and we can have moments where they come out of us. Obviously, if it's a trait, it has to be a pattern that's repeated over time, but does it matter? I'm somebody who kind of feels like it really doesn't matter. I know we're this it kind of pisses me off, to be honest. There's this feeling in the mental health field, and I don't know, I may talk about this more eventually, but there's this feeling we need to have labels for everything. We need to define it very clearly, especially for the damn insurance companies. And I feel can we just say somebody was hostile for one episode, and it doesn't need to be a personality trait and doesn't need to be a personality problem, but it's still a problem? Can we do that? Can we say that somebody acted manipulatively and it wasn't good, and not have to diagnose it? I don't know. Anyway, I just feel yes, I think all of these things were present in the Team 10 house, and they were a problem, whether they were personality traits or not, and whether you put a damn diagnosis on somebody or not. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it's a problem. Okay, and we're getting to the last personality trait, because I know this is not going to be everybody's thing to talk about, so we're moving on, I promise. But the last one was irresponsibility, and it came up when Shane said to Jake, you have a lot of power, basically, as a YouTuber, he has a lot of attention. He has a lot of kids' attention too. And Shane was trying to say to him, you have to be responsible for that. And he was kind of implying that Jake has been irresponsible, and irresponsibility is a maladaptive personality trait. And something I probably should have said in the beginning here, but all of these personality traits, they're usually coming about because we're trying to deal with an emotion. We're trying to deal with something. We're trying to cope with life. And, when somebody's irresponsible, for example, it's because they don't know how to be responsible. They don't know the way to cope. They don't know how to deal with what's happening. And so that's just their way of coping. I'm not going to get this across very well in this video. My mind is not all there today, but I hope just saying that gets you thinking. Okay. So, they did talk about Alyssa Violet cheating on Jake. And not just cheating on Jake, but cheating on Jake with his brother. And Shane was saying, like, he couldn't even process something like that. And I'm totally with Shane. You know, I had a similar experience, not the same experience, not even close to the same experience. But, you know, I've been cheated on by someone that I loved. And I couldn't process it. I still can't completely process it. It's traumatic. Like, it's actually traumatic. Like, I'm not just using a dramatic word here. It's traumatic. And when they were talking about this, I did have a tear fall from my eye because I get it. It's really, really hard. And I was watching Jake, and the whole time, really, but I feel like especially during this, I saw him really struggling to find the words to be able to articulate things. And I have a couple of thoughts on that. So one thing is, and I don't think a lot of people know this, but like I think people generally know that trauma affects your brain. I hope people know that by now. But one of the areas that it can affect is Broca's area. And Broca's area, you know, well, let me just say this. Trauma, usually one of the problems with trauma is memory processing. And it's the way that the memory gets encoded and then trying to recall the memory and everything. And Broca's area is responsible for putting things into words and language and being able to articulate things. And so I saw Jake really struggling to even form sentences. And, you know, I think probably like everybody out there, I was like a little bit annoyed about it. Like, oh my God, just like tell us the truth already. Like, just say it. But at the same time, I've been there. I've been there where I've experienced trauma and I've gone through PTSD. And I'm not saying that Jake has PTSD necessarily, but I've been there where it's like, I can't even describe it to you. And like Shane was saying, he could never even process that if that's what he went through. And like when we say, I could never process that, like that's one of the things that makes it so difficult, is that that part of the brain gets interrupted. It's like you actually can't find the words. And that's what I was seeing as Jake was trying to talk about this. And just to be fair all around here, I saw the same kind of a thing when Alyssa wanted to talk, well, I don't know if she even wanted to, but when Alyssa was talking about the situation, she also had trouble talking about it. And she said, like, I can't, like, I just can't. I think that was the way she described it. And I've been there. I've been there when I'm like, I just can't. I don't even know how to describe it to you. It's just this awful feeling. But something else that I noticed a lot, and I question, although again, I'd have to talk with Jake. And Jake, if you're watching, I'm not trying to say this is what you're going through, but I went through it, and it bothers me that people don't know what this is. I saw him kind of like zoning out, and like he had a hollow face, and like there was no expression on his face. It was just like the whole time he was just kind of, and I've mentioned this before in another video of Inside the Mind of Jake Paul, he just kind of has this like hollow like face. And I think, to anybody else, it might look like exhaustion, and it definitely could be exhaustion, don't get me wrong. Or I think a lot of people might see that and judge and be like, come on, like, is this guy like slow? Is he stupid? Is he ignorant? Like, what is this? I mean, and it's an understandable reaction when you don't know what dissociation is, but I kind of feel like Jake might dissociate a lot, because especially when something traumatic happens, dissociation like springs to life in us, and we have this zoning out and not really being able to access things and able to think. And it's like we're trying. You can kind of see like Jake was thinking and like trying to get to the answer, but he couldn't reach it. And that's kind of like what dissociation does. It blocks you off from the emotions. It blocks you off from like the whole experience of what happened. And while you're trying to process and figure everything out, and you're like zoned out and you're not completely here, like you have that like dead face, and to other people it looks like you're kind of like stupid, or like you're dumb, or I don't know, like you're slow. But it's dissociation. It's not that somebody is stupid. I mean, even Shane said, like, I think you're a really smart guy, Jake. So, like, Shane can see that. I hope you can see that, too. I don't think Jake is an idiot. I think Jake is a 21. I think he's 21, 22. I don't remember. He's a young kid who is still learning life and has gone through some pretty traumatic shit in his life already and is trying to just like move on and cope with it the way he can. But I'm concerned about the dissociation. I'm concerned about the dissociation because if it's not addressed, it just like for me anyway, it caused so many problems down the line. And I just wish that I had known what dissociation was and known what trauma was and was given the proper tools and the help to move on from there. So I don't know. If this feels like anything true for you, Jake, and you happen to be watching one of my videos, which I really doubt you are, then please go in and see somebody. Maybe Katie Morton has a few minutes to like talk and refer you out to somebody, because it's such an issue and it gets in the way of everything, and it makes it so hard to communicate with people. It makes it hard to have relationships. I don't know. That's just my caretaking coming out now. Okay, so I said there was one moment in this... I'm already gonna lose it. Okay, I'm just gonna film myself crying because I can't even talk about it. Because I feel it. So there was one moment where Shane was explaining how he could never, like, comprehend what Jake went through with Alyssa cheating on him with his brother, and I don't know, the whole time Jake, I just like wasn't feeling the emotion. I wanted to feel Jake get angry. I wanted him to be upset and cry. Like I wanted to see something, and it wasn't happening. Okay, well, I just got interrupted, but Shane was having a really hard time comprehending the whole Alyssa Violet situation with Logan, because that would devastate anybody. You know, like I said, it's traumatic. And Jake wasn't really expressing anything, and I really wanted him to. I really wanted to see something come from Jake. And then Shane started to kind of like lose it himself. Shane like couldn't hold the emotion in because Shane has empathy, and he was feeling what Jake must have gone through. And then I don't know, there was a moment where the camera was on Jake, but Jake turned away from Shane, and Jake turned away from the camera, and I'm upset because I understand. So he looked down. He was looking down, and he was looking away from the camera. And it was the first time where I felt like I saw Jake.
I just don't want to like hurt anyone.
Like I saw the vulnerable person in him. I saw the little boy. And to me, like, that was worth the whole conversation then. I saw the vulnerability. The vulnerability I have been waiting to see in the whole series. That's when I saw it. I don't know. Other people may have seen other stuff, but that's what I was waiting for, and that's what I really wanted more from this series. And I'm a little sad and a little disappointed that that's all I saw. But I kind of can understand why. You know, Shane, as far as I know, has not had any counseling experience. He's not a trained therapist, and he may not know how to have these conversations. Obviously, if he's trying to be friendly and be a friend, then I can see, you know, we all learn how to have a conversation like this eventually, hopefully, in life. But at the same time, I feel like Shane could have went in harder. Let me put it that way. I feel like Shane could have dug a little deeper, but at the same time I understand why he maybe didn't, because he didn't want to hurt Jake. He wasn't there to harm Jake. The whole point of Inside the Mind Jake Paul was not to like expose Jake Paul and demonize him. Like, you'd have to be a sociopath if that's what you wanted. And yes, I'm speaking broadly. I didn't diagnose anybody when I said that, but I think Shane wanted Logan. Sorry, Jake. I think that Shane wanted to keep Jake's trust, and he knew that to keep Jake's trust, because I think he actually cares about Jake. And I think, you know, like I said, Shane might be a bit of a caretaker, and I think he actually gives a shit about Jake and sees himself in Jake and has empathy for Jake. And I think he might want Jake's trust, and he knew that if he pushed too hard, he might lose that trust. So he didn't push too hard. That's kind of my opinion. And Shane knows as well as anybody who does YouTube that whatever you say, at the end of the day, you have to live with, because once it's out there, it's out there. So a lot of these topics, and we saw the hesitation from Jake throughout the whole series of not really wanting to talk about things. A lot of these topics are really heavy and really deep and really personal, and in some cases traumatic. And I can totally understand not wanting to push somebody to talk about these things, and it may not actually be even appropriate to, especially on YouTube. So we're here at the end of the series, Inside the Mind of Jake Paul, and I don't know. I feel like if there's any lesson to be taken away from this, if we're going to get any message out of this series, it's that people are complicated. Life is complicated. Mental health is complicated. And the reasons why people do things, they're complicated. There's a lot of facets to what happens behind the scenes, and we don't always see every detail of every aspect of everything that goes on. So I think we need to be a little bit more careful when we go judging people for the things that they do. We need to be a little bit more mindful about the things that we do and why we're doing them. And I appreciate that Shane has done this series, if anything, because I think it encourages us all to be a little bit more thoughtful. When you go digging, there's always a little bit more to the story that you can uncover. So honestly, I'm so done with this series. I feel like we've gone through the roller coaster. And although there are things that I would really love answers to still, and there are people I would love to hear from, for now, like, I need a break. And I think Shane would agree, and I'm hoping that you would agree too. But I want to hear your thoughts. What did you think about the whole series? What did you think about this last episode? Did you have anything to add? Leave that down below in the comments. We'll talk about it. And thank you for joining me throughout this whole thing, learning about Inside the Mind of Jake Paul.